Churches have life cycles that are similar to humans. There's a time when they're birthed and they mature, they continue to grow, all the way one day to sometimes don't even exist anymore. We look at the churches in the New Testament, the specific churches to which letters were written to. I'm not even sure those churches are there anymore, but our churches exist today because of the faithfulness of those churches when they were planted to already have multiplication in mind, of getting the gospel out through the best vehicle possible, which is local churches. So when it comes to church life cycles, I feel like often when in a church plant, all the focus and attention seems to go into launch. There's a lot of pressure there to get rolling and get people, to make sure you have the funding, the signage you need, the right space, all the recruitment, all the things that happen to launch a church are important. But when we first planted our church and just started from scratch with about 20 people, it seemed like all we ever talked about and all we focused on was the launch over and over and over again. That once we actually had our launch service and the church had our first few meetings together, then we kind of got to a point where it was like, now what do we do? Because before we knew it, this momentum started, and we didn't have any systems in place or processes in place that would allow us to be a church that thought not just about the next Sunday, but already had the future in mind. And where that was going to begin for us was to make sure that we were a church that was going to actually multiply ourselves. That we were going to make sure that we were a church that even if one day, generations and generations down the road, doesn't physically exist anymore, that the markings and the reach of our church continues about the church plants that hopefully will come from our church planting movement. And I think where that begins is out of the gate during the launch phase is to make sure that people that are coming a part of the church, they actually know what they're signing up for. That we're not just signing up for a place for you to go because you didn't like your last church or because this church has better music or better children's ministry. That's not what we're talking about here. Like, you're actually signing up to be a part of a church that hopefully is going to be a local church that reproduces itself, that has a reach beyond itself. And that's a really important thing to consider out of the gate at the beginning. It's a culture that you set out to establish in the very beginning. Because if our culture, and it's really easy to do this, if our culture is simply just launch the church and everything's just launch, then we miss the fact of why we're launching in the first place and the next steps and next life cycles that are going to come our way, such as maturity and growth, settling in. Sometimes churches plateau. All the things that happen in a life cycle of the church, our mindset still continues to be, no matter what's going on, we want to be a church that reproduces ourselves, that reaches people for the gospel, who reach people for the gospel, making disciples who make disciples. This reality compels us to invest in church planting churches rather than merely growing content with the churches we already have. We will need to continue the work of starting new churches until Jesus returns, and how that takes place is the culture that's created out of the gate. This is already a value and a mindset and part of the vision of what we are doing. We want to see actually new churches started. We believe the best way to reach a community is actually through church planting, that evangelism best happens through church planting, that the way we'll see the most momentum and excitement and forward movement as churches is through getting people excited about church planting and putting our resources into reproducing ourselves for the future.